I wanted to transition to another interesting talk from Stefan. Stefan is going to talk with us about how to improve your communication strategy through search data. And something about Stefan. So Stefan is a data evangelist specialized in analytics and the uniquely complex needs of the nonprofit sector. His career has centered around the use of technology in communication portfolios, including experience in programming, design, and digital strategy. He has played the role of the client as well as the role of the consultant, which is very tricky for you to know exactly the needs of each one of the players, and works to close the gap between the two. Without further ado, I wanted to welcome you to the stage and then give you the word.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you to you and the rest of the team for pulling this summit together. In my working with the nonprofit sector, we put a lot of time and energy into just attracting data talent to mission-driven spaces. There's a real gravity with technical talent, with data talent towards the private sector, but there's so much need. There's so much need in the social good and the social impact sector, and it's sometimes difficult to help people find that pathway. A lot of, when you think about where data science came from, how it developed, a lot of that comes from for-profit mentality. It developed in the private sector. A lot of the tools are designed and well maintained for a lot of those for-profit uses, and so it takes some creativity, some ingenuity to help turn that over. So thank you very much for creating this space for those conversations to happen.
Thank you for joining.
All right, well, I am going to go ahead and share my screen.
Mm-hmm. We are very excited to hear all about your experience so far close to this NGO world. And I think this is a really critical topic, and also a good starting point, or another thing for companies that are already in this world of data science for social good. So this is a great topic for us to discuss today.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I'll give you the word, and I'll be in background.
All right, great. So I am Stefan. So I lead the data strategy team at ParsonsTKO. We are a consultancy. We work with nonprofits to help them recognize and leverage data as a strategic resource to help them with their impact. In a lot of cases, that comes down to communications. A lot of social impact work is about educating the public, finding the right audience, helping them find access to the support, the resources that they need. So every organization has their own constituency, and those constituencies' needs, what it takes to reach them, are often very different and very complex. And then moreover, it often takes resources that nonprofits don't have in order to reach those audiences. So what I'm going to focus on today are some of the low-hanging fruit, the data resources that mission-driven organizations can access with relatively little effort, and to use those to move forward with their mission work. So a bit of background about ParsonsTKO. We come at our work with nonprofits with this mindset of engagement architecture. So thinking through all the platforms, the people, the processes that an organization uses to engage with their audience. And they use all of that to help create their outreach, to help drive their outreach, make sure they're finding their audience, but then also make sure that when they reach their audience, they're successfully having that engagement so that they can lead to the impact, the success of their mission. And a lot of this is, all of this is in service of your audience. It's all in service of creating the experiences that help your audience get to whatever your successful state is as an organization. In order to do that, in order to design those experiences successfully, you need to understand your audience. So the things I'm going to talk through today are very readily available. Things like Google search data, site search data that people are putting directly onto your site itself, as well as social media posts. And I shouldn't leave out that all of this can be tied back to and mapped to a lot of other interaction data. You think about organizations and their websites. There's lots of ways people can touch and interact and engage with a website. So all of these things can be tied together. But I'm really going to focus on those top two, and I'll talk a little bit about social media as well, because some of the same disciplines can be used there. Now, search data is there. It's there. Google is everywhere. So much happens through Google. So much of what people are looking for happens through Google. And Google search data and site search data, some people feel like, oh, well, that's not all of my audience. It's not totally complete, but it is so much. And when you compare it to other audience research techniques, let's talk about focus groups, for example. You can get orders of magnitude more of your targeted and potential audience. And so these different sources, they give you this wealth of information. Now, not to discredit or discount the value of things like focus groups. Traditional audience research techniques have tremendous value. They give you a degree of qualitative insight. They give you context around your audience's views and perspectives and needs that are critical for strategic planning, for communications planning. But when you want to take those insights, those intuitions, and scale them up and actually see how it scales across your audience, these data sources are tremendously valuable. So I'm going to talk through a few of these tools. I am going to go pretty fast because I did want to try to save time at the end to have conversation and welcome any questions from the audience. So start thinking of them. But let me talk through some of the tools real quick. So Search Console, Google Search Console, is a platform that Google provides to any website owner. If you have a .com, a .org, anything, you can go into Google Search Console, create an account, register that you are a person with authority over that website, and then Google gives you access to how Google sees your website, and then also how the public sees your website through Google. And so these are just a couple screenshots of what it looks like once you're in there. But it gives you term by term the types of queries that people are putting in. What do people search for when your website gets returned? And how well are people engaging with your content when it gets returned for that query? This gives you a sense of what people are looking for, how they phrase it, how does your audience talk about your content? And then with those terms, which ones are you successfully targeting your content with? Do people come to your site almost by accident, or are they coming because what you provide answers their question? So you can really get a lot of information about how your content is performing via Google, and how your audience via Google is comparing your content against others. The next thing I want to talk about is on-site search. So this, this example here is very much geared around Google Analytics. Google Analytics is a package that lets you measure traffic to your own website. It's not the only one out there. There are lots, but in a survey we've done, we found 95% of .org nonprofit websites are using Google Analytics. So it's tremendously common. It is free. There's a huge talent base around it because it's free and so ubiquitous. But within that system, there is the ability to track your on-site search. And so, that's, if you can imagine what a website looks, the little box that's there on the website when you want to search internally within the site. You need to configure Google Analytics. It does not do this automatically out of the box, but once you have it configured, you can start to capture somewhat similar types of information to what we just saw with Google Search Console. But this is a very different use case and a very different context. These are people who have already found you, and now once they're on your site, they are looking for what they want. And so it's almost sort of an opposite sentiment. People searching on Google search don't know who you are, don't know where you are. They're looking for something, and then they find you. Here, they already know you, and they can't find what they're looking for, and so they turn to the site search. So there are, just as the previous one was about sort of understanding your audience's interests, your site search data is more well suited to actually understanding how your content is performing. It can tell you things about your site navigation. How is your content able to be surfaced by the site structure itself. And exactly how you interpret this will depend on how you have your site search implemented as well. But there's a subtle difference in terms of how you should interpret this type of data. Jumping forward, Google Trends is another platform that Google provides by the grace of Google, that they give to the world to help us understand how the world is using their platform to look for things that they are interested in. This is, I think this is from earlier this year. You know, we could see the trends of how COVID searches and COVID queries were rising and changing over time. This is unlike the last two. This is non-specific. So this isn't about you, this is about the world. But this is a place where you can take your hypotheses about what people are looking for. You can take your hypotheses about how people use various phrases, various terms and language, and to see how those are trending over time, between different topics and queries, but then also you can see those breakdowns geographically, and sort of see how interest is trending in different parts of the world. And this is a platform that they are gradually improving, and so they let you do things like searching by discrete queries, you know, actual text that people put into the search engine, but then they also have some of those grouped by topics, and so Google has done some of the categorization and merging around different types of search queries. So there are lots of pieces in there, but what's really helpful about this is being able to understand a public audience and see how those interests are changing. And I find, especially when it comes down to editorial decisions, what words should we use to describe something? This can be really useful in that content production process. It can be really useful in sort of taxonomy, you know, topic decisions. You know, what types of topics do we want to be engaging, and how do we want to describe them organizationally? And can also be useful in campaign planning. Is this the right time? You know, how soon before an election should we start putting up our election content based on how election queries trend? Or is it your mission to change one of those trends? Do you want to be able to see your impact on global search trends? So there's lots of ways that you can use this to explore the broader public audience. A lot of that was about search, and how we can access what people type into search engines, to understand our audiences and understand what they're looking for. You can't talk about that without also talking about social media. And when it comes to social media data analysis and insights, Twitter often does rise to the top because of the open nature of that platform. It's not the only open one. There's a couple others that you can get access to, but it's very common. And because of its role with influencers, a lot of journalists and celebrities tend to favor Twitter. And so it is a place where you can see the sort of the nexus of interaction of a small subset of the population. You know, I think that Daniela made some excellent points in her talk just before this, about the limitations of any one of these data sets. You know, you can only hear from the people who use this platform. But again, compared to traditional audience research techniques, the scales of all of this are tremendously higher. So the social media is just another place where you can see the text that people enter to describe and express themselves and describe their interests. You can see it directly and you can interrogate it. And so some of the tools that are useful there, I mean, this is just a couple things like TweetTech. There's a plugin for Google Sheets called Twitter Archiver that you can get a free trial of. There's platforms for social media analysis, things like Keyhole. There are APIs for each of these. There are tons of ways to get access to this data, and so all of these are ones to look at and consider. So those are all data sets. Those are data sets that people have at their disposal. They are very close at hand. And a big part of what we do is help our clients, help organizations recognize what they have at their disposal. Everyone knows about data analysis, but it often feels inaccessible. It feels like it's an other, it's somebody else's job. It's not a skill set that I can have. And so I surfaced all of those really to emphasize that this is data that's very close at hand for anyone. Some of these are just one website page away. Google Trends is just a website. You can go there and look and start answering questions immediately. Relatively low barriers to entry for anyone running a nonprofit organization. I think the next thing to talk about is analysis. So when we have the data, how do we then start getting answers to those questions? And I really want to encourage everyone that the best analysis tool is the one that you already have and the one you already know how to use. Again, the goal for a lot of this is to how do we get started doing analysis right away, and then we can improve from there once we start hitting the limitations. But a lot of these tools have built-in analytics dashboards and suites. So a lot of times you don't even need to introduce another tool. Just go straight to the interface and start exploring it and answering questions. When it comes to, for you, people with an interest and skill set in data, when it comes to communicating what you've learned beyond yourself, beyond your own curiosity, that's when taking your data out and starting to use things like Excel, use things like Python if you're good at Python, use whatever tool set and skill set you want to start turning the data into curated insights. That's a really important piece of this, is making sure that we put the data in a format that people can consume. If you are data inclined, then that's almost anything. You can use almost anything to start answering questions for yourself. But I really want to encourage people to get the data out of its original source and into a format that's intuitive and easy to consume by other people. And so that's where you can start thinking about things like building dashboards to extract the data into self-service reporting, and just helping to curate. I think curating data and curating insights is a really important principle when you think about the role of analysis. That's what analysis is for, is to turn the data into something that somebody else can use to make a decision. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that. And then I think last thing I wanted to spend a minute on is how to ask the best questions of your data. I really encourage people to start from the beginning, start from your mission. What are you trying to accomplish as an organization, as a mission-driven individual, as somebody trying to drive social impact? And then from there, what are the questions? How does this work? What is the best way to? Why are we seeing XYZ? And so those types of questions are really, really valuable, and making sure that they come from your base goal will help make sure that the results of your analysis are then useful in driving towards that goal. Those what and why questions are very thought-provoking. They're very good for helping people convene around data and helping start conversations that will change the way people think about their work based on data. But if you are responsible for coming up with questions and giving them to somebody else to answer, be generous and try to form yes/no questions. Being able to have firm answers and find firm answers makes it easier to come to a conclusion about what one should do about data. So just a little bit of nuance there. But whatever you come up with and whatever analysis you do, be clear about why you are doing this research. What is the decision that you are going to make? Left, right, up, down. And being very clear about the role of data analysis in the decision making, in the strategy, in the tactics of your organization. That's really what it takes for data to have an impact in social impact work. And then making sure that you can try to pose your questions in terms of data your analyst has available. Not to discourage broad, big, and far-reaching questions. I think those are very useful foils for strategic making conversations, but it's very easy to set yourself on a wild goose chase, to set impossible goals for data analysis that can soak up resources, soak up time, soak up morale. And so trying to break down strategic decisions into decisions that you can make with available data is a really important thing. So yeah, that was all very quick. But after this, I'm going to stop there, actually, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And I wanted to open it up to the audience and hear a little bit more about people's experience with this, questions you have, and so on and so forth.
So first of all, I wanted to thank you for sharing this particular topic with us. There were at least two points that I found particularly interesting. One is the fact that you're suggesting in its majority tools that are free, that don't have any barrier to entry. That makes a lot of difference and shows how well you know the world of NGOs, because sometimes certain barriers that don't exist for the private sector, as you were saying before, can be a big barrier for someone that is working in the social impact world. And the other one that I found really interesting is how you connect questions to answers. So instead of starting with the data, which is traditionally a technical approach, okay, you're an NGO, you have problems. What are your problems? What do you want to know about your audience? And then let's go to the answers. Let's see the how. But really starting with the questions and then transitioning to the second point. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and when we have here, one is from Alice. She's asking if you could provide a specific example of a best practice, some example, something that an organization was doing wrong and got improved with these data analytics.
Very, very good. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something jumps to mind immediately. There is a term of art in data science and data analytics, and just sort of nonprofit management, and that is vanity metrics. There are these metrics that everyone defaults to, especially in communications, especially in thinking about the web world, systems like Google Analytics. There are the metrics that these platforms spit out. How many page views did you have? What is the time on site? A lot of very industry standard things that people just say, okay, that's my metric. In the social media world, it's followers. How many followers do we have? Is that number going up? Is it getting bigger? Is it getting bigger? A lot of these metrics are, once again, they weren't designed for us. They were not designed for the mission impact sector. They were designed just as sort of baseline. This should appeal to anyone. And in a lot of cases, they come from the for-profit sector for things like e-commerce. Google Analytics was designed around e-commerce first and foremost. Bounce rate is another. It's a favorite of mine. Everyone wants to fix their bounce rate, whatever that means. But should it go up? Should it go down? It really depends. Bounce rate made sense if you have a product page that you want people to add to their cart and then go buy it. But if you don't have an e-commerce website, then that's not right. If you have thought leadership content, if you're a blog, a content-driven nonprofit, you want somebody to get a report, you want them to read it, change their mind, and go off and change the world, that's one page. That's a bounce always. So being able to start with your mission, what are you trying to accomplish, and then pick your metrics based on that. Don't just pick the metrics based on what the default, what the industry standard is, because we are not adhering to any industry's standard. And so being able to be selective and curate the metrics that are relevant to your mission, that's a big one for me. And not to totally abandon those vanity metrics,
Obviously.
but augment them with meaningful metrics that are relevant to your work.
Okay, I think that's a good point. So now I'm going to convert this question to, so now we are talking about best practices. What is a typical mistake that it comes to your mind that NGOs make, aside from that, when trying to run an effective communication strategy that is based on data analysis or information that is available to them? Something that comes to your mind that...
So I think a very common challenge, and this is probably a mistake at the sort of manager director level, but we let our data get fragmented by our org charts. So you think about an org chart. Well, I have a communications department, I have a development department, I have an advocacy department, I have my programmatic research teams, and they all have their own tools and they all do their own work, even though they are probably all interacting with the same audience. It's the same person who encounters you as a constituent, who then becomes a supporter, who then becomes a donor, who then will walk into a congressperson's office to advocate for the issue. And that's the same person throughout. And every time they're in a new system, they have a new communications experience, they're interacting with a new team. And so I think allowing those divisions to divide our data really limits our ability to understand our audience, understand those audience journeys. And so a big thing that we try to do is knock down those boundaries, and not necessarily in the org chart. You can keep your company structure however you like, but being able to say, this is the audience experience, so let's connect that data wherever it may be. That's a big one for me.
So having the complete, I'll call it customer, I'm not sure if that's the most adequate word, but kind of having the customer journey from end to end, from the beginning, the first interaction till the last one. Hopefully there is not a last one, but having the complete journey of that customer or that person that is interacting with the company in something that is accessible in only one way, so that everyone can have the perspective of the entire journey of that person and not just a fragment, as you say.
That's exactly right. And recognizing that experience likely bounces back and forth. Even within communications, there'll be the email people and the social media people, and they're probably talking to the same people. But so recognizing that it goes across, because once you recognize that and you start connecting the data between those touch points and experiences, necessarily you will then start connecting those teams. It's very often we'll come in with a conversation around audience journey and customer journey, and it's fine, by the way, to borrow those private sector terms. It's they're very useful, and so we shouldn't be ashamed of borrowing from the private sector. We just shouldn't be constrained by it. But yeah, once you start having people think about it in that way, then you will start to spark those conversations. We very often will do a workshop between teams and departments, and they say, oh, I didn't know we did that. Oh, that's really, oh, you have that conversation with people. That's great. I've been wondering that. So just being able to have this all together, it sparks these conversations. And that's a point that I really want to drive home, is that the role of data in these organizations. We don't do data for data's sake. We use data as a way to help the organization be more efficient, be more effective. In a lot of cases, what you are acting on with the data are your colleagues. They are the people in the organization. That is the unit of action for data. How many people have you changed the mind of? How many people have you led to a new decision? How many people have saved time because your data has made their process more efficient? And so figuring out how your data acts on the people of a mission-driven organization is really, really important.
I couldn't agree more. I have just one last question, and this is related to, so when we think about NGOs, we know that some of them have not even had a communication strategy that is based on data, and then we have the very advanced ones. What is the first stage that an NGO could aspire in terms of becoming data-driven in terms of their communications strategy? So what if you had to say the first one or two steps that an NGO could take in order to become more data-driven in this regard, what would those steps would be?
I'll give you two. If you're only going to do two things, focus on awareness and adoption. So awareness, just being conscious of the data resources you have at your disposal. That's often a first project that we'll do with an organization, is we come in and we gather everyone in a room and we say, what data do you work with? What data do you work with? And just that discovery, recognizing that these things are available and evaluating it. We have Google Analytics. Is it well maintained? What is its health? Is it customized so that it's capturing your site search data? Is it tagging your data with things like your topics and your taxonomy so that its results are relevant? So what's available and what is the state and health of it? That's all that awareness bucket. And I think that's a very important first step, because you often find things that nobody knew about. and can solve problems, and that have been longstanding. And then the other one is adoption, and that goes back to that point before. It's a great thing to have data. A lot of organizations, they know their strategy. They've got lots and lots of data. They even spend tons and tons of time reporting. There's the board report, there's the monthly report, there's the bi-weekly report, there's the campaign reports, and nobody looks at them. It's you could do analytics on your own analytics. How are people in the organization consuming? So really focusing on the organizational culture. I think I phrase this as the question: show me on the calendar where you do analytics, and ask that of everyone in the organization. Show me on the calendar where data makes a difference. And that I think that's a challenge that once people recognize it, it becomes easy to fix. And I wouldn't say this means you need a new meeting. The last thing we all need is another meeting in another Zoom room. But figure out in the meetings you already have, the work you already do, how can I incorporate data into our weekly editorial meeting? How can I incorporate data into the quarterly planning meeting? And starting to recognize the opportunities to use data as an arbiter. I refer to data as a coffee table. It's the thing everyone gathers around. It's the context for a conversation about strategy. And so just recognizing those opportunities to drive adoption. So awareness, adoption, those are your two steps.
So basically bringing the conversation of data to the table, so that it doesn't become something that we do individually, but it becomes a permanent conversation between people, not just the IT team, but all of the teammates together to discuss that topic. Perfect.
That's exactly right. And this is another thing to recognize. Very few nonprofits have the budget or the bandwidth to have a data person. So you need to figure out how to make data a part of everyone's job. And that is for anyone who came to this event, to this summit, is probably predisposed to become a champion for this kind of thing. How can you help other people engage with data? There's a difference, to use a sort of religious metaphor. A lot of people see data as data as an oracle. You're the person everyone comes to get the data questions answered. I would much rather have people be data missionaries. How can you help other people embrace data in their own lives? And that's something that I think is really important in any organization, but especially in the nonprofit sector, because we can't always be there. They won't have the availability to ask at any hour of any day, go to the data person. And so I think that's really important.
I agree. So thank you so much, Stefan, for sharing your knowledge, for also being open to for these last minute questions that sometimes are a bit out of the box, but really bring other topics to the conversation. And we hope to continue talking even after the event.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. And please, yes, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to keep having this conversation offline.
Sure. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.
Thank you.